Very excited to be here for the Censored to Celebrated Season 2 launch with Sally Ember, EDD, who is somebody that I've gotten to know over the past 6 months or so in the virtual space. And I'm really excited to meet her. I got to meet her over the summer in real time, in real space. And we might talk a little bit more about space in general today, because I know that's something Sally's really interested in. But we're here to talk about celebrating diverse sexuality and gender. And we tried it over on the HOA, the Google Hangouts on Air. It was not working for us. So I'm glad we had our after party chat set up here on Blab so we could move over here. So welcome, Sally. So good to see you today.
Thank you. Yes, I feel like we've been jumping around in one of those progressive dinners or something.
I know, right? Yeah, it's like, oh, which house are we going to now? And what are we going to eat there? So Blab is a little bit of a different format. We do have 2 open seats, but for right now, because we're not in the after party part of our conversation, I'm going to ask that it just be Sally and me. But you're welcome to make comments. You're welcome to tweet and tell a little bird about what we're doing here. And we're going to get started talking about celebrating sexuality and gender. Specifically, I did it around the celebration tour this summer with my family. And I got to meet Sally during that. And we're also going to talk about books and authors, because Sally is an author. And Sally, will you tell us a little bit, how did you get into this forum I know you've been thinking and doing a lot of work around diverse sexuality and gender for a long time. Will you tell us a little bit about how you did that?
Well, thanks, Melita. First of all, for having me on your great show with Season2 Celebrated, and for being one of my guests on Changes Conversations Between Authors, and being a great HOA host that you are. You and I connected on your show at first. And I'm interested in the work you're doing because to probably about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little more, maybe more like 12 or 15 years ago, that really was the focus of my professional work, was in diverse sexuality and education, working with young people in a variety of ways, as an educator, as a expressive arts counseling group leader, and performing arts director and improvisational theater trainer, as a conflict resolution facilitator and trainer for adults and youth, and in too many other areas to mention, including recreation and classrooms. I've had that as part of my work. And the way that I see it is it's always around as an issue, even if it's invisible to some people. And I'm bisexual, which is not visible to a lot of people. And I'm also somebody that's had partial and very invisible physical disability for most of my life, with one of my legs being problematic. So I'm very familiar with the whole idea that sometimes you just have to tell people what's going on. But sometimes you don't want to.
Right.
And then people will make assumptions, or people will have their ideas, their questions, their biases, their prejudices about why you are the way you are without knowing the truth. And then if you don't want to tell them the truth, or you don't feel safe enough to tell them the truth, that creates a whole lot of other problems. So when I work with young people, a lot of what I do is model what I hope for them will become something they can do. I try to be very matter of fact. I try to be very much like, this is no big deal. I think part of what happens in our culture, especially before the last few years, is that people make it a thing to be lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning, intersex, or anything other than the heterosexual, masculine or feminine, typical person. And then when you aren't typical, they make it seem like there's something odd about you, and it's to be whispered, and it's a secret, and let's not talk about it too loudly. And I really object to that, because there is nothing to be ashamed of, and nothing to whisper, and nothing that we should be hiding or pretending about. Someone can choose not to share, but that doesn't mean it's a subject that is rife with shame or humiliation or any other kind of thing. So I spent most of my life just trying to bring things out into the open and have it be not a big deal.
Well, it's interesting, and I love that that's your approach. And you and I have talked some over the past 6 months about how sometimes it's easier to speak one's truth and more safe to speak one's truth depending on your own privileges and your own location in kind of this heteronormative society. And so I think that's some of what you're getting at, it sounds like.
Right. I mean, that a lot of people assumed I was heterosexual because a lot of my younger life, I lived with a man and had a child. We weren't married, and we weren't monogamous, but that wasn't obvious. And until I actually had a committed relationship with a woman and people saw me more with her, nobody had a reason to think otherwise. And so I would sometimes just go around and tell people, because I didn't want them to assume anything.
It was important to you.
And then I usually had that position of privilege where I was the leader, I was the teacher, I was the instructor, I was the trainer. So if I could do it, I made it safer for other people to do it.
So on that idea, because as you know, everything with Caitlyn Jenner has happened this summer, and we've had a lot of our youth coming out too as transgender, like Jazz Jennings, who wrote the book I Am Jazz, which was a book that was donated by many families as being important to them for their transgender youth. So I think I donated it to 6 or 7 libraries. So that was a really big one. So she's 14. Jazz Jennings is 14. Caitlyn Jenner is 65 and is just coming out. What is happening right now? Has something shifted in the discourse that makes it easier for some people to be coming out as transgender right now? What do you think about that? Because clearly that's not true for everyone. Well,
it's definitely not true for everyone. And I think Bruce Jenner, Caitlyn Jenner, is one of the more privileged people on the planet. He started out as a white male who was a multiple award-winning athlete and had lots and lots of other privileges associated with his economic class and his social status. So for him to decide at a very late age to be honest about what he believes his gender identity to be, and to do whatever he wants to do about that physically, and then to get Vanity Fair to help him do it, that's not typical. Okay. Right. And then to get a TV show for it, that's not typical. To be on the cover of 20 magazines, that's not typical. So in some ways, I'm sure there's a downside to that, but in other ways, he really got a lot of support. He got a lot of help to become her. And when Caitlyn now is living as Caitlyn, she gets a lot of support to be Caitlyn that most people don't get. And not to say that it was all easy for him. That's not my implication at all. But some people get 0. Okay, so let's just have those two extremes in that way. And obviously it wasn't easy for him. He's got some substance abuse issues, and he got into that car accident. And when he was trying to become she, it was a whole big deal. That's partly how she came out, by the way, was that she was forced out because of the publicity from that car accident, because she was transitioning at that time and she looked more like a woman than Bruce. So people started asking questions. I'm not sure that she would have come out that soon or that quickly if that accident hadn't occurred and she was kind of outed by the paparazzi. Don't you think? Yes.
I've been thinking a lot about that as well. So what I find so interesting is that Bruce says, Caitlyn says that she's known since she was 5 or maybe even younger. And I think that's the experience that I'm learning about a lot of folks that I know who have transgender children. And what is it about this point in time, 2015? What has changed? I mean, I know marriage equality just got passed this summer, but what do you think? And you wrote your dissertation on this in 1997, and I loved reading it, as you know.
1995, and it got published 1995. In 1996.
Right. So what have you seen that shifted over the last 20 years around this that has, transgender, when I was doing my master's degree, we didn't even talk about gender identity.
Really?
No, not very much. It was really all about
way sooner than you were. Maybe I know. Just went to school that wasn't up on it. I don't know. But do you know the whole theory of morphic resonance and the 100th monkey? Do you know what this is?
Yeah, that sounds very familiar. But why don't you refresh us?
Well, the short story is, anthropologically and biologically speaking, there is a critical mass of beings, whether they're animals or humans, who are learning something. And at some point, once they learn it, it jumps into the morphic resonance, cross-cultural, Carl Jung, unconsciousness of everybody kind of thing, where the story came from these monkeys who lived on an island and they started washing their sweet potatoes. And when the 100th monkey started washing their sweet potatoes, suddenly the monkeys on the other island, who had no overt communication, started washing their sweet potatoes. So that's how the title, The 100th Monkey, came about. That's how the whole concept came about to be called The 100th Monkey. But the real frame for it is morphic resonance, MORPHIC, morphic resonance. And it has to do with when we as a culture, we as humans or animals, create enough people thinking or feeling in a certain way, like we did with marriage equality, like we are with cannabis reform and legalization, like we are and did with racism and civil rights, and so many other things to do with women's rights. And now we are with the Syrian refugee crisis. It reaches a critical mass. Enough people are thinking, feeling, and talking about it that suddenly it leaps into this massively larger group of entities and beings who know and think and feel and talk about it. And I think that's what we're witnessing in this last 12 to 18 month period with gender identity and sexual orientation identities, which is fascinating and fabulous to be witnessing. But other than saying that, I can't explain it.
Right.
I don't know why now is when it happened, because I don't know if you could do like a Google search and look at all the different kinds of media that came out and really prove how it happened. Somebody probably could. I haven't done that.
Well, so morphic resonance is kind of the lay term for that, the tipping point. That's kind of what I've heard it referred to as.
Well,
similar
the
concept?
Tipping point is different. The tipping point came out of Gladwell's work, and he's talking about when something gets to a point where you cannot go back. That's called the tipping point. That's a very different concept. It's like, you know, you can no longer pretend you don't know. You can no longer pretend that it's this way. It's now that way. We're getting that way with the amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere that no matter what we do very soon, or it may have already happened, I think this year, we can't fix it. That's the tipping point concept. And that's not morphic resonance. Morphic resonance is a quantity of understanding that becomes so vast and pervasive that it just spontaneously permeates to people who didn't ask for it, didn't pick up a magazine and think about it, but it's in their consciousness anyway. So that's different.
Oh, that's neat. Oh, thank you. Thank you for kind of unpacking that for me. I appreciate it.
They're both interesting though, because I think we've reached a tipping point with tolerating intolerance. I don't think we will ever go back and say it's okay to be mean to Black people just because they're Black. There are people who do that, but as a culture, we don't accept it anymore.
We're not tolerating
right? And institutionalized racism, once it's exposed, everybody says, oh, we shouldn't be doing that. Whereas 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, various places around the planet still are saying it's just fine with them, but not here, right? So eventually things change completely, but it's all these different stages that it occurs in, right?
Well, and I've thought about the word tolerance a lot. I love that you brought that up, because when I was coming up with my name for the work I wanted to do in the world, I was like, it is not about tolerance. That is not enough for me. It is about celebrate. It is about moving beyond the taboo. Because I was like, ooh, taboo, from taboo to tolerance. And I thought, no, it's beyond tolerance. I need it to be so okay that it's celebrated. Whoever your authentic self is, that I believe that should be celebrated, as long as you're not hurting anyone. I mean, that's kind of
that's a very good point. And the intermediate term that's been used for the last 30 years or so is acceptance, which is still a little bit more patronizing than celebrated. Okay. It still looks at the power dynamic as uneven. And it says it's mine to decide if I accept you. Right. Whereas celebrated is a much different concept. And I really like it.
Yeah, I do. Well, thank you. So you seem to think that when I say that I did the celebration tour and I was inspired by you, that I am lying about that. So I just want to set the record straight. While we're talking about celebration, is that you scared the hell out of me, I have to say, when you invited me to be on your show. And I was so excited, but it was about children's literature and young adult literature about, celebrating diverse sexuality and gender. And I thought, oh, I love that topic. Oh my gosh, I have no idea what's going on with that topic right now. I don't know what's being written. I haven't read anything. And so truly, the celebration tour came out of the fact that, number one, I knew I'd be talking to you on July 1st. And number two, I was going to be up in New England and had to get me and my children up to New England. And so I thought, well, maybe I can combine these. So yes, maybe it was my creativity that actually led to going to 24 states and Ontario to donate books about diverse sexuality and gender to libraries. But it was you were definitely my impetus, because you scared the hell out of me with that request.
Well, I don't know if I wanted your impetus. If your impetus was based on fear, that's not a very good place to be. I
don't know. Really? You don't think so?
Well, I have to say that is my karma. I would say that my inspiration, unfortunately, has come with an incredible number of people who say that they're intimidated and or afraid and or feel threatened by me, but then end up using it in a very good way.
Yeah. And that's very much what I mean. I wasn't afraid of you. I was afraid of, oh, wow, I am so excited about that. And it also made me realize that, I had been an educator and read a lot of children's books, and I just was not up on a topic that I wanted to know more about. So it was a very good motivating kind of fear of just, I wanted to actually know what I was talking about.
You accepted the challenge to up your game.
I did.
You had to up your game at a time that you kind of wanted to anyway, is what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it made me, I don't know, it showed me the power of this virtual world. And I know we have some folks coming in and joining us, and it's just so amazing to me to see all the different forums where people are able to get together to talk about, to celebrate things that they're passionate about. And I think without this tool, I would not have known, without Blab or HOAs, the Hangouts on Air, what really got me into this was, how do I find people who want to talk about this with me? Because I am always, as you're talking about, I think I'm always the teacher in most of the rooms that I'm in my communities. And so it's great to find other colleagues that I can really interact and learn from and be inspired by. So I appreciate that.
Well, this is basically taking consciousness raising groups of my youth and of the generation before me and bringing them into the virtual world and saying, look, you're not the only one who anything, fill in the blank. You're not the only one. Right. And let's talk about it. Let's use that commonality. Let's become Project Censored, or let's become Occupy whatever, or let's become Censored2Celebrated, or let's make a movement out of it now that we can all communicate and reach each other across every boundary possible. That makes it so that you don't have to just drive over where you can reach by car or bus and be with each other physically, which is what other consciousness raising groups were limited by.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know when you published your work, or you were working on your research in 1995, what was the reaction to you doing this work? Was this something that people were thinking about, diverse sexuality and gender?
Oh, no.
At that time?
Well, yes. Yeah. Well, the people that were my thesis advisors were in the School of Ed, but they weren't in the part that was the Department of Social Justice. There was, however, a subunit of the School of Ed that is the Department of Social Justice at University of Amherst, Massachusetts. And a lot of people in that part were all over that and had been for a long time. And so I had that cross connection anyway, because I came out of a previous association with anti-racism, anti-sexism, anti-heterosexism, pro everything that's really good for people, from reevaluation counseling, from the movement for a new society, from conflict resolution and openness with communication, from all kinds of other parts of my life that came together into this graduate degree that I earned, first a master's and then a doctorate in the 90s at UMass Amherst. And I found all these kindred spirits who were already doing some of this work in gender studies and women's studies and racism and multiculturalism. And so my degrees really intersectionality. Right. And you can tell from my dissertation that I was all over intersectionality. And before it even had that word, that wasn't the word at that point. The words keep changing. The concepts are similar.
Well, and that's so what amazed
a lot of people. Wait, go ahead. What?
That's what amazed me, is that you used the language that we are using now. And I wondered how much that was being used. You say sexual orientation and gender identity. And
I was very careful to use the latest language that was available at the time, aware that it was at the edge of what was changing and not using the old language. Right. Yeah, so that was part of my choice.
Well, and it's amazing 20 years later, that is still what I think is the most current language. It's very
good, because there really isn't a better way to say that. What wasn't correct was to call it orientation without the word identity, to call it something that seems like a choice when it isn't, or to call it something that might be pejorative when it shouldn't be. And so I was very careful to steer away from anything that seemed like it had a nastiness to it or had a confinement to it that funneled people in the wrong direction.
Yes, that makes sense. So we are at 1:30, which is, I know when we had said we would kind of have our shift over into the after party chat, but we have about 5 minutes before the official after party chat starts. So Sally, I just wanted to ask you, before we start inviting folks in to jump into these 2 open seats, do you have any questions for me about, I know we've been talking about how we celebrate diverse sexuality and gender around books, authors, celebration tour. Yeah. Any last questions before we open it up?
Well, I'm putting out the whole little bird thing.
Yay! Oh yeah, tell a little bird. Everybody, give Sally some props over here.
This new section.
Woo. Thank you for doing that.
What is it you really want me to talk about? Because that was a very broad question. It's like the question I ask at the end of my show, and it's like, look, I can write 20 books on that. So give me a little more of a funnel here.
Oh, okay. The funnel would be, for me, what changes have you seen in the past 20 years since you wrote your dissertation, and what are you hoping to see? Let's do it that way.
Okay, well, that's a really good way to talk about it, I think. Thank you. One of the changes I've definitely been excited to see is marriage equality, obviously. Not just here, but lots of many other countries around the world. Very, very fun to see that. Lots of many is a weird way to put it, but that's what I'm trying to say. Right? I haven't counted lately, but yes, I think it's more than a dozen and fewer than 2 dozen. So somewhere in there. Yeah. And I think that in many ways, it parallels the feminist movement and outgrows from the anti-racism and anti-discrimination movements of many different portions of the culture, anti-disableism and anti-classism and anti-whatever anti you want that was, based on discrimination. And that gays and lesbians and bisexuals have been trying to claim a seat at that table for over 100 years. And just the way women were thrown out of abolition and told to wait, gays, lesbians, and bisexuals were thrown out of feminism and told to wait, and thrown out of racism and told to wait, and thrown out of lots of other fights, and like anti-war, and told to wait. Well, I've lived through most of that. I'm not 100 years old, but I'm 61. And so I've lived through most of that, and I've watched all this waiting, and I think the waiting is friggin' over. So I'm happy about that.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned gay, lesbian, and bisexual. Where do you think transgender folks fit into that? Because they seem to have been asked to wait.
All right. I don't think they were even asking to be at the table in any kind of obvious way. Right. And so I think they felt so marginalized and were so marginalized, and not so many of them were social and political activists 20, 30, 40 years ago, that there wasn't that voice being heard. There were a few novelists, fiction and nonfiction writers, a few radio people. Dan Savage, of course, has always been an advocate, and there were a few others, but really very few. Yeah. And so I think that's the biggest change that I would note is the inclusion of intersex and queer and transgendered and questioning and two-spirit and asexual, and we could go on and on, like broadening out to recognize all the different ways sexuality can manifest in humans, and being, as you said, not just accepting, but celebrating, but also getting educated. Like I certainly have had to up my game to get educated about what all those mean, because I didn't start out knowing that 25 years ago. I'd never heard of two-spirited, or even intersex wasn't the right word back then. They were still calling people hermaphrodites. And I didn't know till I did the research for my dissertation that there aren't just 3 positions on the gender continuum. And when I did my research, there were 6. And now I think there are a dozen, chromosomally speaking. Right. So that's brilliantly interesting to me.
I know. It's not just based on what the doctor says about you when you're born, right?
Or how you look, or how your chromosomes look. No.
Yeah, it's so much more complicated than we ever realized. Yeah, absolutely. And I know you said your feminism has changed, even just in writing your dissertation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Did I say that? What did I mean?
You said that. Well, you said something about like you had identified and really were interested in radical feminism, but then there were parts of that felt too essentialist, and so it sounded like you moved away from that.
I remember that. That's true. Thank you for reminding me.
It's fresh in my head. I know you wrote it 20 years ago. So.
No, it's true. Well, I'm all about inclusiveness, and anytime there's any group that claims to be politically activated and wants to be anti-discriminatory on the one hand, and on the other hand goes on some rant and rave about exclusionary tactics or points of view, I'm not into it. So I think that it's not true of all radical feminists, obviously, but there are some that would take a particular position of excluding men, for example, or excluding those who don't speak correctly or think the way they want them to think, or whatever. And I'm not so much saying that we should welcome every expression equally, because I'm not interested in prejudice, and negativity and disrespect. But I'm also not interested in exclusionary tactics that don't allow for the dialogue and don't allow for the education to occur for anyone who might want to have their mind open or their life changed or their behavior improved. So, that's what I was thinking.
It's been a real challenge, especially for transgender women, and how to be in the feminist space and how to be accepted there.
And I'm going to say something that's really not popular right now. Gay men who wear women's clothes and do those shows make me really uncomfortable. And gay men who dress as glamorous women make me really uncomfortable. But you know what? So do the women who dress as glamorous women make me really uncomfortable, because I'm not that kind of woman. I don't wear makeup. I don't wear high heels. I don't shave. I don't wear bras. I hate all that stuff. And so when men who believe they're women take that extreme version of feminine and that's what they want to be, I want to slap them. I want to say, no, you don't have to be Doris Day. You don't have to be Cher. You don't have to be some extreme version of femininity to be a woman. You can be 100 different kinds of women. And I think that's the biggest change in transgenderness, for men becoming women and women becoming men as their real identity. They're not just all lumberjacks, and they're not just all super, super long fingernails, red lipstick, up to the wazoo makeup and high heels women. There's now more variety, which is more normal when you look at all people, right?
Yeah, it's more understanding of the wider nuanced spectrum, sounds like. Yeah,
like don't just pick a famous woman to be, just be yourself as a woman. Right? And if you're not Caitlyn Jenner, you're probably not famous. So you're not going to get a cover on Vanity Fair. Get over it. Right?
I want to let folks know that if you could go ahead and tweet and tell a little bird about what we're doing, but also I have a follow-up question for you about that, Sally, because that made me laugh. And we are getting ready we have an open seat if somebody would like to either ask a question in the comments or come on into the open seat and ask me or Sally a question. We're celebrating diverse sexuality and gender today. And today is the season 2 launch of Censored2Celebrated, the webcast, and we're on Blab, which I'm really excited about because this is a new tool.
I have a question about this whole Blab thing, because I'm getting 81 applauses and you're not getting any, and that doesn't seem fair. I'm going to give you one.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, you can. This is something I've been learning about. I've been giving you tons because you're talking, and I love, celebrating.
So I'm probably getting most of them from you.
I think so, probably. I don't know. Blab is new for a lot of folks. So they don't always know what these little applause things are, but that's just like, if you like what somebody is saying, go ahead and give them some props. And that's just clapping hands, I think, is what it is. So, yeah. So thank you, Sally. I appreciate it. Anybody want to jump in? Just let me know and I will let you in. So my follow-up question, oh gosh, have I lost it now?
It was about transgendered people and what's comfortable or what's feminine or what's masculine. We were on that topic.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've been talking a lot about butch and femme roles, and that's not always considered politically correct. This whole, it's very dichotomous and kind of what you're describing. And what I like about the fact that that's still part of the discourse is that it's not the only part of the discourse. It seems like it used to be the focus, right? You had to be butch or you had to be femme. And I like that it's just like another option now. You can be a queer femme who's pansexual, or, it's like you can do any kind of different combination that works for you and helps you express who you are in that moment.
Well, yeah. And the thing is, what's really kind of ironic and sad and funny all at the same time is once some heterosexual people got comfortable enough to get to know some gay men or lesbians, that's almost always the only or the first question they would ask is who's on top, or who's doing the inserting, or who's catching and who's receiving, or whatever language they fumbled around to try to use, because that fascinated them. Yeah. Right? That's what they wanted to know. And there's so much more to know and so much more not to talk about that shouldn't be talked about. So I think that's all kind of getting to a better place.
I agree. Well, and then I think what I'm seeing a lot happening right now, I'm part of a PFLAG group, and what I see happening is people's partners are transitioning and becoming expressing their authentic gender identity. And it leaves the partners in a bit of a quandary, because they may have expressed themselves as lesbian. They were two women, they thought, together, and then one person is now a trans man. So what does that make the other partner? Are they now a heterosexual woman? Can they still identify as lesbian and seem to be with a man? So it's you
That's
and I
why
have talked.
I asked you to read Gender Outlaw, because that's just her main question.
Exactly. And I've been loving it. And so I wanted to bring it up just so that other folks could, because I love that you brought that question to me. And I love reading about a Gender Outlaw, especially the updated version.
I need to see that. I haven't seen the new edition with the extra co-author and all that. That was news to me. I'm glad you posted that.
Yeah. So, but talk a little bit about, because you've been thinking about this for a while because of that book, Gender Outlaw, but it kind of blew my mind when you told me about it. So tell us a little bit more about that.
I think the major question that needs to be addressed is, why is every other part of our social and personal identity based on ourselves, except for sexual orientation, which has now somehow been determined to be based on the external genitalia or personal identity of our partner? Like, why can't I have a social identity that's just about how I think and how I feel, and whatever my partner happens to be looking at the moment, or feeling at the moment, or wearing for genitals at the moment is what it is, and I can be with them or not. But what does that make me shouldn't be the question. That's the wrong question. What does their decision or their appearance make me is a backwards question.
It is. So what's the better question?
Well, I think sexual orientation needs to be redefined as an identity. And it's because the word orientation is in it, it already positions us to be facing somebody else as part of the identity. So it needs to have the word orientation taken out of it. And sexual identity needs to be the reclaimed version of the term. And then what is my sexual identity would be like, what kinds of people do I want to be sexual with, if any, and under what circumstances? And then we would have a dialogue or a conversation about whether I want to be monogamous or polyamorous or serial monogamist or a long-term monogamist, or whether I'm asexual or whether I'm pansexual. And then what kinds of people I want to be with, if I want to be sexual, is just a part of that conversation.
Yes, I love that. I love that. I've been thinking so much about it ever since you and I started talking about it back in, say, June or July is when we talked about that. So,
and then if I want to be celibate, which a lot of times I am, based on my meditation practice or being on retreat or just life circumstances, and I'm happy with that, that's different than being asexual. And nobody talks about that. I've not heard one person on any of these until today talking about voluntary celibacy when I'm not a nun and I'm not a priest and I'm not trying to make a point. What I am, and this is really important for me as a person to have discovered, is I am not involving myself any longer in relationships that aren't healthy and purposeful and meaningful and relevant and in some ways necessary. And I have a very narrow definition of what's necessary, because I've had lots of relationships. I've had way than enough more sex than anybody ever needs with all kinds of different people and situations. I'm not looking to expand my horizons. But that's very different than young people or people who are experimenting. So I'm not putting that down. I'm just saying, for me, that's not where I am. So for me to get into a relationship, there'd have to be a really good reason and a lot of really good qualities and conditions for me to do it. And otherwise, I'm not interested. I got better things to do. But that's not asexual.
Right. Yeah. It's a really nuanced way to be thinking about this. So I like that.
And that's where I am. And then when you tell people that, they're like, it's like their little brain meter can't even, like, grok, cannot communicate, cannot process.
You said one of the key words there, grok. Now, I know you're an author. I know you talk to a lot of authors. You're the author of the Spanner series. Talk a little bit about the word grok, first of all. And secondly, talk about how your work and your thinking around diverse sexuality and gender has influenced your writing. Because I know you talk about healthy relationships in your books too, in your fiction books.
I am very in on that. Well, let's talk about Bruce Corville, because Bruce Corville inspired my tinting section of my Spanner series. Thank you, Bruce, for the short story, Am I Blue? Everyone should read that short story. Find it, go to his website, buy it, go to the library, read it. Because it is the impetus for my putting the concept of tinting into my Spanner series, futuristic utopian ebooks. And it has to do with the idea that people would one day just wake up, humans would wake up, and everybody's skin would be colored slightly or very blue, depending on the degree of homosexuality we are understanding ourselves to feel, or it would be colored slightly or very pink to red, depending on the degree of gender discontinuity we feel with our physiognomy. So if I'm born a woman, but I feel more like a man, I'm going to be bright red if I actually feel that I am a man. And if I just have kind of an intermediate androgynous thing going on, I might be kind of pink. And if I'm a person who was born heterosexual or thought I was heterosexual when I was born, or people made me think that, and then I realized, oh, I'm actually very attracted to women or men, and I am a woman, then I'm going to be very blue. Or maybe I'm just kind of in the middle. So the character I would be if I were in that story, I'd be lavender. I'd be kind of a combination of reddish and bluish, but kind of in the middle. And then Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land brought us the word grok, Grok. And it has to do with a comprehensive understanding in a visceral, mental, spiritual, and emotional way of comprehending something. If you grok someone or grok a situation, or even in the book, they talked about grokking in fullness by actually ingesting someone's dead remains in a soup. That was kind of near the end. If you haven't read the book, sorry, big spoiler. But it's really important because it has to do with full ingesting, not just physical, that you really get it. That's grokking. And it's become part of the vocabulary. I mean, it came out in the 60s. And it's become part of the regular vocabulary. And what else came out of that book for me was a recognition of the acceptability, the understanding of what it meant to be bisexual, and the recognition of how great it is to be unpossessive, unjealous, and polyamorous, which I was for most of my adult life. And I thought it was really healthy not to have monogamous, very limited, very possessive basis for relationships. But then when I went into a different portion of my life, I decided I wanted to be monogamous because there's a power in that if you choose it. And so I did that for a while. So I feel like you should just get to do what works for you.
Yes. And that it will change over time. So with the tinting, could that change from day to day, how lavender or purple or blue you might be in any given day?
You know, I didn't have it come out that way in my books. I thought that would be really hard to depict, and very much difficulty would arise in trying to talk about it. But I did have it that it would last for about 10 years or so. And it just sort of gave me the concept to the people in the culture that it would be long enough for everyone to stop being hysterical about who's what and who's doing what to whom and who feels what about what. And by the time the tinting faded, people would just be like more regular about everything. And that would be the purpose of it, that it wouldn't necessarily have to be permanent if people could really grok the purpose. But if they didn't, I imagine the aliens would keep it going until the culture really changes.
Well, I bring that question up because in your dissertation, you talk about the phrase differential authenticity. So what I was trying to figure out is with differential authenticity, and correct me if I'm getting it wrong, but my simplistic understanding of it is that in different environments, we're going to feel more safe and connected. And so we're able to be authentic in a different way than we may still be authentic in another environment, but not but in a different way. And so I guess with the tinting, I was like, oh, maybe in that environment, somebody would be really lavender, but in another environment, they would be, much more.
Well, you know what? I think you bring up a really important point, which is that if the aliens had set it up that way, meaning if the author had thought to have the aliens set it up that way, it could have been something that varies over time or even in the course of a day. But the complexity of that and the thought of that just seemed overwhelming and daunting. Yeah. And just having it be kind of what would be the most that you would ever be is what I decided the tinting would demonstrate. So if you've ever had thoughts about being with people of the same sex, you'd be some shade of blue, even if you've never acted on it. And the more you feel it and the more you've behaved that way, the bluer you'd be. And that would be your color for however many years people are tinted. And the same with gender identity. If you've ever considered being a different gender or really believe you are a different gender, you'd be on that continuum from not any color all the way to red.
The red, yeah. Huh. So you're talking a lot about the word bisexual, and I know one of the newer phrases that's coming out, like Miley Cyrus has come out with telling people that she's pansexual. And what's your kind of feeling around how all-encompassing is bisexual? Is it really just binary about two genders? Or do you see it as being more comprehensive in the way that I think some people are using pansexual now?
Well, I think there are three things going on with that, if you really want my opinion. One is that bisexuals always gotten a bad rap, that people go around telling everyone who's bisexual they're confused, or that they're not sure, or that they're unwilling to come out as gay or lesbian, and they're pretending that they're still heterosexual, and all kinds of judgmental, ridiculous assumptions are laid on bisexuals. So the terminology is not neutral, and it's certainly not positive. So I think people don't want to claim it anymore. And the other misunderstanding is that we want to have sex with anything that moves. And there actually was a magazine in the 70s and 80s called
Anything That Moves,
which was kind of hilarious. But I think that because of all of that negativity, people who are interested in being with people of a variety of genders, whether that's binary or not, don't like the term bisexual, first of all, because it doesn't include the variety. And secondly, because it's really negative. So pansexual grew out of the 70s and 80s and 90s, mostly the 90s, as a way to bypass bisexuality and recognize the variety of genders, both.
Yeah. Yeah. And it does seem like there's a lot less of a pejorative sense around the word pansexual.
I just think people don't know what it is yet. It'll get bad. There'll be plenty of people making it bad. Ted Cruz hasn't found out about it yet. Not really.
Okay.
No, seriously, it's just not in the popular lexicon yet. Although my favorite thing that Dan Savage ever did, by the way, just to give Dan Savage some props, the best thing he ever did was in the last election during the primaries. He was so mad at some of the things Rick Santorum was saying that were so anti-gay and anti-marriage equality that he made the word Santorum into a noun. So if you Google Santorum, you don't get Rick Santorum as the first 5 things that come up. You get the definition Dan Savage gave to the word Santorum, which I will tell you what it is because this is PG-13. But you can go and find that out. And it is a totally perfect comeuppance, or I don't know what you would call that, moral, poetic justice, I don't know, for Rick Santorum.
Yes, I agree. Oh, that was awesome. I agree. We've got about 10 more minutes, and I just want to invite anyone who'd like to jump in to ask Sally Ember, author and educator, a question, or me, Melita Noel can too. We're here to entertain questions and ideas and thoughts. We've been talking about a lot of different things about diverse sexuality and gender. You can also tell a little bird about what we're talking about.
This Blab thing brings out the teacher in me, and I'm like, well, why isn't Georgia jumping in? Why isn't Nissan Communications jumping in? Mohammed, why aren't you jumping in? Rick, come on.
That's right, Rick, come on. So,
if you don't raise your hand, doesn't mean I can't call on you. Right, okay, I'm done.
Yeah, you know what? I realized that I need to make my screen bigger because I'm actually at that point in my life where I'm having trouble reading the small screen. So yeah, I can see better now. There we go. Hey, okay, yeah, Rick, Mohammed. Georgia, who's coming in to ask a question? We'd love
nobody, because I scared them all. See, you made them think I'm scary. It's all your fault.
Oh, no. I have to tell you, Sally and I had an amazing dinner in San Luis. I was having one of those, shall we say, very grumpy days with my family. We were traveling a lot, trying to get from, what was it, Sally? We got from Ontario to Austin in like 4 days or 5 days or something.
You drove like 12 hours a day.
Oh, it was insane. So by the time we got to you, Sally, I'm just giving you the props here because you not only picked out a fantastic restaurant, we had it all to ourselves so the kids could kind of run a little wild, which was great. But the food, the Mediterranean food was amazing. And Sally's in if you're in St. Louis, I had no idea what to expect. I've never been to St. Louis. It was right around the time when people were really, it was the 1-year anniversary of the Michael Brown shooting. And so it was a time I was like, oh boy, it's going to be interesting, you know, and it was
and
just
we were in that part of St. Louis County. We were in North County, right in Florissant, actually.
Okay. I didn't know that.
We were right next to the library that we picked, that I gave you the choices to pick, was in that part of St. Louis. So that was awesome.
Yeah. It was a great library too. I really liked that library. So,
anyway, so that you told me what kind of food you guys liked, and I looked on Yelp, which is one of my favorite websites for finding restaurants, and found this greatly reviewed Mediterranean place, and we went there. And I wish I could remember the name of it. Do you remember the name of it? I can't remember it.
No, but I
want to give them a shout out, but I can't.
Yeah, they were great. They were great. So what, speaking of road trips and the celebration tour that we did, what's your biggest and most fun road trip that you've ever been on?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. Well, when our son was younger, we used to take a lot of road trips and camp along the way between New Hampshire to get to St. Louis. Or we would travel through New York State and get to my friends who were at the time either in Syracuse or in Albany, and we'd go visit friends in Pittsburgh or go up to Cleveland, or we'd go the southern route and go through the campgrounds and lakes, and we'd take a swim and we'd camp out all the way to get to St. Louis. So that I have a lot of good memories of that route, several different ways of doing that route with our son, and tenting, or sometimes getting in a motel if it was like thunderstorming or tornadoing. Right. Let's not forget tornadoes.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
So that is probably not going to answer your question strongly enough with specifics, but I will tell you one thing that happened. We stopped, Christopher and I, before we had our son, we took a road trip, same thing, New Hampshire to St. Louis, or actually it was Massachusetts to St. Louis. And we stopped in the Blue Ridge Mountains at this gas station. And on the back of our car, it said no nukes, because I was part of the Clamshell Alliance, which at the time was trying to stop the Seabrook power plant from getting into New Hampshire. And so no nukes was our bumper sticker. And so this guy saw this and he thought it said no cukes, which are cucumbers, right? And he got into this whole discussion with us about how cukes are great and why don't we like cukes. And then he got into this whole discussion about how when the electricity goes out, it means the aliens are trying to talk to you. And they can make the electricity to go out in large swaths of places, huge cities or whole regions, so they can talk to certain individuals and give them information and give them invention schematics and give them a lot of plans for the future. And his wife, he said, was one of those people.
Wow.
I've never forgotten that.
Oh, my gosh. Okay.
She was being communicated to by the aliens.
So did that make its way into your book, would you say?
No, it hasn't yet, but I'm considering it. But the thing is, it's like, what happened with that? I don't see her schematics. I don't see her inventions. I don't even know her name. So I'm doubting her. But I'm not doubting that could happen. I just don't think they were the real deal.
Yeah, yeah. And did he ever get that you actually had said no nukes and not no cukes?
Oh, no. Christopher and I just looked at each other. We're like, never mind. We just didn't even bother.
That's awesome. You know, it's interesting that you mentioned Seabrook, and that just brought up for me that I was in Seabrook, New Hampshire, having lobster this summer with my cousin, and I went, "Aren't we in Seabrook, right by like the nuclear reactor? Like, did that ever happen? So what happened with that?"
You wouldn't have been in Seabrook having that lobster if it hadn't been for the Clamshell Alliance, because they were radiating the ocean water and they were killing all the creatures for miles around by raising the temperature for their coolant system and all the other terrible things that nuclear power plants do. So there you go.
That's what I thought. It had been shut down because I was like, I don't know if I want to be eating lobster here. I did get a little worried.
Well, your lobster probably didn't come right from Seabrook. It comes further out. But anyway.
Yeah. Good point. So, okay. Well, we are just have a few more minutes. Anything else that you think we should say to wrap up here on our little
I want you to tell people how to reach you and what else you're doing. And what they can jump in.
Sally is also a host of webcasts, and she has done 43 of them. Her Changes show, conversations with authors,
between authors,
and this is my 11th show because we're on season 2, but I only do one every month, and so I get out of practice, especially when I've been on the road, and I think I'm still tired from the celebration tour, but I do want to let people know that I have a website, Censored2Celebrated. I'll put it in the comments, censored2Celebrated.com. And I have all the pictures and videos and all kinds of fun stuff from my travels, including some fun pictures of Sally. And I interact. You can sign up for my emails, and you can be kept in the loop about, you get all the first releases on everything that I'm doing. So, that would be great if you want to sign. I've been doing these little Twitter videos. I don't know if anybody's experimented with this, but you just do a 30-second video or 15-second video about any topic. And I've been asking people to respond about who talked with you about diverse sexuality and gender when you were a kid. That's one of my favorite questions that I ask librarians on our trip of 24 states and 1 province. I also asked the question, what's your favorite children's literature or young adult lit book? And I got some really great answers. So I've been asking those questions and doing some selfie videos, but I've also been interviewing other people. Like I interviewed my dental hygienist the other day, and somebody else who follows Censored Celebrated went to his dental hygienist and asked her the same question and put a little video up. It was really fun. So if you do that, go ahead and do an hashtag Ask Melita so that I know if you have a question you want me to do a little video, or even if you do a video just so I can find you again. And Sally is typing up some stuff there, so I'm going to let her finish that, and then she can tell us the best way to find her. This has been so awesome.
Everything. So you can find me everywhere. You can find me on my own website, sallyember.com, SALLYEMBER.com. You can also contribute to my well-being and financial success on patreon.com/SallyEmber.
Awesome.
And get some free ebooks or some discounts on my editing, writing, tutoring, and or proofreading. You can also look at my boards on Pinterest, where I have a whole board devoted to authors and books that influence me. And I also have a whole lot about my Spanish series on my boards. Lots of different parts to that, as well as other interesting things there, which is Pinterest is /Sally Ember. You can also find me as Sally Sue Ember on Google Plus and YouTube, where I have my Changes videos always available to be watched. Changes, Conversations Between Authors, happens live on Wednesdays, almost weekly, 10 a.m.
Yay.
And you can find me as Sally Sue Fleischman Ember on Facebook, and you can find the Spanish series on both Google Plus and Facebook. So find me somewhere on Twitter is @Sally Ember EDD.
And I have a whole page on my website that has all of Sally's connections too. So you can check there if you need one spot, or of course, I'm sure sallyember.com will have all of yours as well. Good. Well, thanks, Sally.
Thank you so much for having me on and having this conversation. It was super fun.
Yes, it was. And thanks everybody for chiming in and joining us. I was saying Georgia because Georgia had to leave a couple minutes ago, but that was great to have her here. And Sally, thank you so much. Just until we meet again, I'm going to ask everyone to celebrate all the people in their life because that's my thing. But Sally, I just want to say that I celebrate you because you just teach me so much with all the work you've done and you're thinking about the world and diverse sexuality and gender. And so thank you. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. Well, I celebrate you because you're doing it. You're doing it every day, which I don't do that so much anymore. And we need you with your family and by yourself. Keep going, Melita.
Thank you. Well, and anytime, and if you're in Austin, give me a shout. We have an awesome studio. I'm going to show you my husband's art real quick because his studio is here. It's here in Austin. So if you're ever here, we have a thing for fair trade organic coffee. We're kind of just like that. There's some really good stuff made here in Austin, and we're always happy to give a tour of his studio. And we're getting ready to do all kinds of art stuff this fall because it's a big season in Austin. So here's one of his paintings that I just love. I don't know if you can see it. Woo! But this is him in his big artist chair with his cup of coffee, and he's holding his paintbrush, and he's looking at some of his masterpieces. So anyway.
Wait, stop wiggling. Yeah. No, you didn't stop wiggling long enough for me to see it. So is all of that one painting, or are you focusing on one painting? I can't tell.
It is one painting. Let me go back a little bit. It's just hard to get it from this angle. Can you see?
All those different squares and shapes are all part of one painting.
Correct. This is like a meta. I call it the Meta Man painting, where it's him looking at little descriptions of all of his artwork.
And not all of it. He has coffee there. Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
You see it?
Now that you stopped wiggling, I can actually see it. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah. So he actually wanted to use that canvas and paint over it, and I told him he couldn't. I was putting it in my office because I love looking at all his different works, and it's got some of my favorite colors. It's a very kind of rainbow piece of art. So I love it. So
nice.
And it's got his coffee and his paintbrush. It's kind of like the epitome of him. His name is, as you know, Sally, Javier Lopez Cantu. He goes by Javi. And he's very quiet, but he does some really, really neat. It all comes out in his art. So it's fun.
Very nice. So then let's remind people of how they can watch this later when it isn't live.
I will be putting the recording on my website, censored2celebrated.com, and I will be sending it to you, Sally, if you'd like to put it on any of your websites and locations as well.
Are you also going to upload it to YouTube onto your channel?
I will. Yep. It'll be on all of my social media. So anything #Censored2Celebrated.
When you are done uploading it to everywhere, send me those links and I'll link to them from my website.
I will do. That sounds good. Great. All right. I'm going to stop our recording. So again, Celebrate everyone in your life. And Sally, you stay on for a minute so that we can finish up, and I'm going to stop recording. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
And let's see if this actually stopped recording now. Nope, not yet. Still recording.
It still says on the record. Okay, we're on the record.
Yeah.
Well, if we're going to be on the record, I want a recording deal. I want to sing. I want to do some spoken word poetry. Let's have a poetry slam.
I like that idea.
I was listening to the Bee Gees this morning. I was really into them. Not the falsetto Bee Gees, pre-falsetto Bee Gees.
Okay.
The song I was